This is a production of Cornell University.
So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the final Hemp webinar series. I don't want to speak for you all, but I've had an absolute blast with this seminar series, and I have learned so many different things, and I want to reiterate my gratitude towards our wonderful speakers, George, Tony, Gemma, and Kim, for handling so many logistics associated with this work, our interpreters, etc. And last but not least, I want to thank y'all for showing up every week. I hope this has provided some real value. All of these seminars are available on YouTube on the Cornell SIPS, Cornell SIPS channel, and please view them, review them, share them. So today, I wanted to just briefly reiterate our work at Cornell and the USDA. So we're trying to build the world's largest seed library of genetically and geographically diverse hemp genetic resources. So this can be seeds, clones, etc. Our goal is to store them safely, long-term, characterize them, collect data, all kinds of data about them, and then share those seeds and the data with many different stakeholders and collaborators. So sometimes people will be trying to breed new varieties of hemp that are adapted to different regions, or studying the genetic mechanism that controls fiber quality in hemp. Those are two potential applications that our work will enable. So let me stop talking about us and let's get on to the real topic today. So I'm thrilled to introduce to you Dr. Tyler Mark. So Dr. Mark's research group is developing a local, regional, national, and internationally known research program that is grounded in an interdisciplinary approach. This approach has yielded 31 research publications, secured over $24 million in extramural funding, communicates that research back to key stakeholders, and is continually building new collaborations within and outside of the University of Kentucky. In 2014, he was recognized as a CFAIR AAEA Early Career Professional Leadership Award winner. And in 2016, he co-authored the Golden Quill Award for the most outstanding article published in the Journal of American Society of Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers. In 2018, one of his master's advisees was awarded the SAEA Outstanding Master's Thesis Award. His current hemp research efforts include hemp market metrics, national survey of hemp production costs, evaluation of hemp crop insurance, and best management practice for hemp contracts, alternative pricing method for hemp products, consumer demand for hemp products, life cycle analysis of hemp grain for aquaculture production, and evaluation of hemp grain for beef production, and estimating the economic impact of hemp production. So he's clearly been very busy and he's extremely knowledgeable. I'd like to make 2 points before he starts. The questions always fill up really fast. So if you want him to answer your questions, start putting your answers in the Q&A, not the chat, the Q&A, as soon as you have them. And we'll organize them and try to get to them in a timely manner. Secondly, I love seeing where all of y'all are from. It's so exciting to see people from almost every continent. We haven't had an Antarctica watcher yet, but everywhere else. So without further ado, I bring you Tyler Mark.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach, for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. And let me get my screen shared here and we will get rolling because we're going to cover a whole lot of ground this afternoon, as you can imagine. And as Zach talked a little bit about, the group I work with has been extremely busy over the past several years, and since I've been working in this since 2014. So we're going to talk about the economics of hemp production. But before I get started, all this work would not be possible without all my collaborators from across the country and across, even some international and across governmental organizations as well. And I've thrown I think almost all of them up here. If somebody's on here and I missed you, I apologize because there are a lot of different people I work with on a lot of different projects. And we're going to talk about a lot of those different projects today and some of the results that are really starting to come from a wide range of these projects. So just to kind of give you a little bit of a feel for where we're going today, we're going to touch on policy, we're going to touch on production, we're going to touch on consumption, and then we're going to maybe look into the crystal ball a little bit and try and look forward as to what's coming. And, I kind of browsed through the participant list, and there's a number of you that I've spoken to before. And if I haven't ever spoken to you and you have questions, we can't get to them today, feel free to reach out. And I'm more than happy to try and address those questions the best I can, or at least point you in the right direction. So, all right, so let's get started. So on the hemp policy front, this is a paper and some pieces that we're working on with the ARS, or not ARS, AMS. I'll try and get all my acronyms right today, but unfortunately that'll probably miss a little bit. But this is a USDA funded project. And we've been really looking at hemp policy and as it kind of spans across time. So we had the 2014 Farm Bill, and all by we had the 2014 Farm Bill that just finally sunsetted on January 1st, 2022 this year. But in the meantime, we had the 2018 Farm Bill along with the final rule and the interim final rule. They were all published. So we had all these different moving components in this. So that's really caused a lot of confusion in the policy space. So we've been trying to go back and look at these hemp plans and what they actually say in them, what they mean, what type of verbiage is being used in them. Are they consistent across time? And, we would have thought that as we move from 14 to the 18 Farm Bill, that we would have gotten some more consistency. And we did get a little bit more consistency, but we've still got a real long way to go to have an efficient set of regulations for this industry. So I kind of have down here at the bottom right, the 23-24 Farm Bill, and what are we going to do with that? And what is that going to look like? So a lot of my group and a lot of individuals within my group are starting to think about what are the types of policies? What do we need to be communicating to regulators, legislators? What types of issues are we seeing on this front from a hemp standpoint that we can help fill in some of those gaps with? So that's really something that's been on the forefront here lately to think about, and we can talk about those maybe in the questions later on. But as we were looking at these, we thought they might become more consistent. However, what we really found, and to some degree is expected, these are really, really driven at defining the difference between hemp and marijuana. So, which was needed, but at the same time also still causes a lot of confusion, because if you start to look at a lot of the plans and you start to, we looked at 67 different plans. So now you're going to tell me, well, there can't be 67 different plans because there's not 67 states. Well, there's not 67 states, but there are 50 states plus tribal governments. So when you start to throw in each one of those individual tribal governments, you start to really expand that number, and so hemp isn't even mentioned in all the plans. It's in terms of the way it's defined. Then you can get examples like licensee and registrant. So they mean the same thing, but they're in two different plans. You can get lot. Lot means one thing in one plan, and lot means a different thing in another plan if you start to read the different plans closely. So we've still got a lot of confusion, and this paper should be coming out hopefully pretty soon. We're in the process of getting revised and resubmits done on it. But I think this will help clear up or at least point to some of the additional issues that we need to really think about for the 2023-2024 Farm Bill. depend upon when it actually comes out. So this has been one area in terms of policy that we've been looking at, and I'll talk about some more a little bit later. But I'm going to dive now into kind of where I got started at in this space, and this is on the production side. So one of the pieces that we've been working on with some colleagues in Colorado State is trying to look at the differentiation of what happened to different states as they came into production. So when I start to think about those states that came in that 2014 time period, the Kentuckys, the Colorados, Vermont, and a few other states in there. So what happened to them? How did they come out and peak? And so this graphic right here, you see that they kind of peaked at around 50,000 acres in 2019. We all know 2019 was kind of the peak of this industry for the time being. I think we'll see many more acres than this over time, but where we currently stand. So they peaked around here and they've been falling pretty quick. That group that came in 2016, they peaked even higher, as interest was really ramping up to that 2019 growing season. Those states that came in later have been kind of a little more flat. But we've been trying to really figure out what has driven some of the adoption and disadoption in these states when we start to think about expansion and contraction of the hemp industry within these states. So this is a lot of interesting work that also will be coming out pretty soon as well. Now, keep in mind, we have not differentiated, especially in these two graphics, between floral, grain, and fiber. So they're all kind of lumped together right now, and that's something else we're trying to parse out. However, we don't have a whole lot of grain and fiber acres in the country, or as many acres in the country. So, starting to think about this and kind of where we're at in the state of Kentucky and kind of the state of the industry, when we start to think about the top 10 hemp states, Montana, Colorado, Kentucky down here, when we look at USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service survey that just came out in February, they said we had about 54,000 planted acres, about 33,000 harvested acres, and about $824 million in value. Now, you can start to think about, is that really an accurate number? Is that inaccurate? Is that high or low? What I would tell you is that, yes, there are some differences between what you see in the planted acres for the NASS survey versus what you see on FSA and other reporting services. But I would just say, hold on, because we're going to get better at this. Now in 2022, we have to report to FSA all the hemp acres that are produced. So that's going to help clean this up, clean this data up. But this was a nice first run at these types of figures and stuff from a national standpoint. And I think we're going to have a couple other surveys come out. I know specifically myself, we have, between myself and Colorado State and AMS, we have a national production cost survey that we're in the process of trying to get out. We were hoping to already have it out. However, the wheels of government sometimes move a little slow. So we're still trying to get that through OMB, but hopefully we'll get that out in 2022, and we'll have another really in-depth census look at what all is going on in the U.S. hemp industry. And I think that'll provide us some really nice baseline numbers for as we continue to expand this industry over time, as now we've come from the 2019 time period. Now the industry gets a chance to reset and launch again, probably as we start to see more grain and fiber acres come into play. But I also want to take a moment and step back here and put this industry in perspective when we start to think about other crops in the country. So, we're talking about 54,000 acres. That puts us at a really, really small, there's less acres of hemp than there are cucumbers. So keep in mind where that plays at on the national landscape. When we start to think about how this plays in the Farm Bill and the work we're going to have to do to get recognized as a larger crop and move out of kind of the specialty crop place. Now the floral side may stay in the specialty crop space, but I think grain and fiber are going to move out into a more commercial space and compete with those traditional corn and bean, those types of commodities in that space. But keep in mind, we're a pretty small fish in a big pond right now. So that's really where we're at when I start to think about that. So I'm going to bring in and compare and contrast a little bit here. Some floral pricing stuff. Now, this is from the NASS survey. One thing that we really learned from the NASS survey is we didn't do a very good job of asking the question. So if you look at this from an outdoor perspective, You see the prices down less than $100 a pound. And this is still even high. So really what we picked up here is the smokable price, which is an industry that I don't even think with the NAS survey we were really trying to pick up. However, it's not shocking that we picked that up, right? Because if you start to think and you go forward in this graphic and you look at the biomass pricing, biomass price has dropped precipitously since that July 2019 timeframe. You know, we're down here less than, you know, in a lot of states, less than 20 cents, 30 cents per point. So producers saw that this wasn't a profitable game anymore to be in this space. So what did they do? They switched to the smokable space. So they picked up a lot of the smokable space so that they could survive. You could also throw in Delta 8, played a role in that. We'll see what happens from a policy and regulatory standpoint of Delta 8 going forward as to if that continues to be a viable option for producers moving forward after the 23-24 Farm Bill. So this is something that's really happened in the industry. But here's that smokable price. If you wanted to look at the smokable price, you know, this is really more indicative of what NAS picked up in their survey, which I think is interesting. And also helps us to think about this next national survey of making sure that we differentiate between floral or biomass price and the smokable price in the industry, so that we're comparing apples and apples really with our production cost surveys. But smokable price has been kind of holding on. I am using Pan-X Exchange as a source of pricing right now for some of this. Most of you probably know there's no open source to do that with. So that's something to think about as well. Also brought this down and put this in a floral pricing because I think it's also really interesting to look at this across states. So the midpoint, you'll see Oregon kind of dropped out here. Oregon's got a really low price. They've had some really big issues out there that they've been trying to deal with. But if you look at Colorado, Kentucky, Northeast, Great Plains, they're all kind of pretty similar right here, right around this 27, 28 cents per point type period for a midpoint. The high side's probably the newer material. This low side will be all the old material. So remember, we had that surplus of material on the market from 2019 and 2020. So we're still trying to get that off the market. Hopefully we've worked through most of that. When I was out at NOCO for that meeting, they talked about moving supplies of biomass storage from about 2 million last year down to about 50 million this year. Hopefully, well, my bigger question on the 50 million pounds is still left in surplus is what type of, is that in accrued? Is that in floral material still? You know, how has that been stored and is it actually still valuable? There are some companies out there that are trying to buy up as much as that as possible because you're starting to see that amount left, that 50 million pounds is not a whole lot. So left on the market. So companies are trying to buy that up before prices start to, I think, trend back up in 2022 and 2023, as we see some areas in the country where biomass supply is in pretty short supply on that side of the coin. So that's a bright spot that I'm kind of seeing as well. But I wanted to pull this back, you know, to just the economic basics of this. So CBD it's really a struggle right now when you start to look at this, and you may or may not agree with the pricing components and the percentage, CBD percentage I put in here, and I'll talk about that here in a second, because you'll see the 39 cents per point. You know, it's kind of on the upper end or the high end of what we're seeing in the market right now. 7.5%. If you talk to the geneticists and those components, and especially now with the rules and regs in place where we have a 30-day window. So once you harvest that, once you test that, if it's less than 0.3 and you get that additional 30 days of growth, then you can spike up above this 7.5%. But this is run on about a 25-to-1 type ratio. And I'm guessing several of the geneticists prior to my talk talked about that and some of the assumptions there. But if you look at the bare ground model, it's not very profitable right now. The plasticulture model, which has a much higher cost of production, it's definitely not profitable. Now, I will say this is for my base scenario. And you will find producers throughout the country who have some other contracts in place that may pay higher than that. They may have a higher CBD percentage and may have a different cost structure than what I'm looking at. So what I would tell you is if you're getting into this and you want to go look at it, go to the University of Kentucky Industrial Hemp page, and you can find this budget, and you can modify it however you would like to modify it to look at your individual scenario that you have in there. So that's something you can definitely go do. So kind of moving forward, when I start to look at the fiber price, and I only pulled the fiber price in for the NASS survey because I wanted to point out a couple different things. So I'm really trying to figure out what's going on in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and a few of these other states, while they have such a higher price than what I would have expected. I mean, even the 15, 14, 17 cents that you're seeing down here is, I think, kind of on the upper end of the spectrum of what a lot of fiber processors are going to be able to pay per pound to make a profit, especially right now with the products and stuff that we're kind of looking at. And I'll touch on that a little bit more here in a minute. One idea might be that they're trying to dual or triple crop this. So that may be where they're getting this higher price, but that's definitely another red flag that we need to think about when we come back out with additional surveys in this space, so that we don't get some convoluted numbers like this that are really, really difficult to explain, and they don't match up to what we're kind of seeing from a group like Panex Exchange who's reporting this. So this right here, this gray line, this would be hemp. This is fiber material. I will tell you, this is an extremely thin market to get pricing information from. So keep in mind that that is a bit of a struggle, but they've been right around that 10 cents, 8, 9 cents, maybe up to 11 cents a pound. And that's going to be over here on this this axis over here. What will also be on this axis is this right here, which is the conventional grain side of things. It's been pretty flat. It's been going up in price. And I expect to continue to see this kind of have an upward trend in price potentially, especially if it's going to compete with our traditional commodities and buy acres away from those traditional commodities. Because for the industry to grow, it's going to have to find products and end markets that produce a profit high enough for those producers to switch acres out of those traditional commodities into hemp production. So that's definitely something to think about. This brighter blue line is going to be over here on your right-hand side axis, and this is going to be organic grain specifically. So it's got a little bit higher pricing component, which you would expect. But we're still seeing a lot of struggles in the grain space to really get production in place. But I think this is something that's going to come in time. I mean, we're still trying to take a lot of Canadian genetics and genetics at northern latitudes and bring those down to an area where we can grow grain, as where we're trying to grow grain, and we don't have any chemicals or anything like that in place yet either. So, but that's a double-edged sword, right? Because many chemical companies, many of your traditional companies are not going to get into this game until they have a minimum number of acres. And we already saw that we're a pretty small fish in a very big pond. So them committing R&D to chemicals for hemp specifically is going to take some time yet still to get to that point. But I am really excited about what Zach and them are doing at ARS and collecting the genetics and the genetic material. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how that continues to develop and help to bring cost of production down and increase the yields to make this crop more competitive with the other commodities on the market. When I start to think about this from a grain and fiber standpoint, and I think the industry is really, starting to reset itself, and grain and fiber are starting to find a little bit of traction in the market. I think I'm probably still a little high here. This is not a level that you would see in some states. Now, there are some states in the northern part of the U.S. that are seeing this 1,200 pounds. Pricing's probably still a little low, but I am starting to see some positivity on the grain and on the grain and fiber side. And I think there's going to be a lot of potential in this space to think about how we get these numbers to go even higher. And I think to get these numbers higher, and we'll talk a little bit about market potential going forward a little bit later, but trying to push up the yield numbers and also trying to push up the price numbers as we seek markets that have high value. So when I think of high value products, especially in the fiber space, in general, I'm not speaking or thinking about the textile industry. I'm thinking about activated carbons. I'm thinking about bioplastics. I'm thinking about those types of products, potentially biofuels, depending upon how you're doing that and which type of fuel you're going after. So I'm trying to think about how we get to a higher price as well as we get these yields up, going forward for this side of the coin. I will say on the production side, there's a whole lot more things coming. And I'll foreshadow a couple of different things that we're really working on here at the University of Kentucky. And these are projects that are about ready to have some manuscripts released and hit more of the mainstream. But been doing a lot of work with looking at processors, labs, where they're at in relation to where the hemp acres are at, and starting to think about how we coordinate those two, specifically on the floral side. You're definitely probably going to see a lot of production close to these labs and stuff because of the cost, or sorry, you would see that on the grain and fiber side because those products are very difficult to move long distances. So, you would think about want to have a processor and have those acres pretty close to that. The labs, we're still trying to figure out if there's enough lab capacity to handle this in a timely fashion to be able to make this market go forward. We've also put together a set of hemp production contract checklists. So those of you who are thinking about putting together a contract, or those producers who are thinking about entering into a contract, we're about ready to release our contract checklist. And that's a project with the University of Maryland that we're working on. So, that's definitely something that is coming along fairly well and should give people a really good insight into what they need to make sure to have in that contract. Another piece that we're working on with Colorado State is really looking at the market channels and factors that affect the market channels. So when we start looking at these producers across the country, how many different market channels are they going into, and what is their preferred market channel? What do the different market channels do to their cost structure? What type of expertise do they need to have to get into those marketplaces? So this is a really cool piece that we're about ready to release as well. And it's a small survey right now. It's of about 30 producers in the state of Kentucky and also in the state of Colorado. So granted, it is a small sample, but it really gives a nice insight into the number of different marketing channels that some of these producers are using. And some of these producers are using upwards of 6 and 7 different marketing channels. So can you imagine the time it takes to manage that many different market channels for that producer? So that's a really interesting piece. So I'm gonna jump forward, and now the other hat I get to wear now is on the consumption side. So, and I would say that the first thing that we really run into that I see as a big hurdle for the industry to get over is really how do people associate this crop? So when we start to ask, and this is out of a survey that we've been running since February of 2021, that runs monthly. If you'd like to talk to us more about that, I'd love to have some further discussions with people about what we have in this survey. But a lot of this survey has to deal with what are the first things that come to mind when you start to think about hemp and CBD, and what you're going to see is marijuana, weed, are two of the first ones, cannabis, another big one that all come to the forefront. Well, that really makes me think about from an economic standpoint, are we going to be able to get a segment of the population that doesn't want to deal with marijuana or anything associated with marijuana? Are we ever going to get them to be consumers of these hemp products? And also it tells me that we as a hemp industry have not told our story well enough or educated consumers well enough to know the difference between hemp and marijuana. And if we're truly going to get this hemp industry to move forward, we've got to be able to differentiate the two and understand the differences and communicate those differences between the two different crops going forward if this industry is truly going to develop and meet its true potential meet the potential that I think it probably has the ability to do. This is some exciting news that I'm seeing coming out of this survey. So we're looking at non-consumers and likely to try CBD in the next month. So for 2021, you pulled August, September, and October, there's a lot of those non-consumers. This is a sample of about 1,000 national. It's a national sample, national representative sample. And about 46% of those non-consumers are saying that they're willing to try or going to try CBD in the next month. So that tells me that there's still a lot of interest out there in this crop and interest in consuming these products. I will say that this survey is probably right now really driven more at the CBD side. We are getting into some of the other components, like we've got some stuff coming up on infused beverages, pet foods, and a few other ideas as well that are percolating around this survey. What I will tell you, if you're considering getting into this as a processor or a manufacturer, some of the things that consumers are really thinking about is price is really important. Amount of CBD in that dosage is really important. Those tend to be the two big ones. The other big one is or CBD per serving. So those are the things that they're really worried about. Medical recommendation, not as much, but I think, depending upon what FDA does and the direction that they go, will also drive a lot of this information once we get back the human trial results that are out there to start to think about. One other place that we're really working on with the University of Vermont and also Colorado State, when we start to look at the hemp grain side of things, we're doing a lot of surveys on one side to ask people what they want, what they like, what they think they want to consume. But now we're trying to validate that on the other side and look at the scanner data and what types of trends are we seeing in the actual sales food side of things. So this next couple of slides really digs down a little bit more into the grain side of the coin, and really grain as an ingredient in hemp food. So this is scanner data, as I mentioned. Granted, it only goes up to 2019. We've just got 2020 data, but we have not gotten it added yet to this chart. But what you see is in 17 that kind of peaked, and it's been trending down a little bit. I think that the 2020 data will probably start to trend back up, at least from the early numbers that I've kind of seen. I don't know how much yet because we haven't got that graphic completely pulled back together. But and this is total sales for hemp ingredients in supermarkets over time. So just to kind of give you to set the baseline on that. If you wanted to break that out by region, interestingly enough, up in the Northeast, that New York, Pennsylvania area is really been a big chunk of the sales for 2019, all along the coast, which I would have expected. The north, east, north, central is also a fairly big area. Still got some issues in the south and the southeast, east, south, central, to really get some additional sales in that space, at least as we look at this for 2019. So, but as I mentioned, this is only on the grain side of things. We have not been able yet to really pull much in on the CBD side of things. Some of the new data for 2020 has a few more CBD products in it that we'll be able to break out specifically for it as well. If you wanted to look at this from another standpoint, this right here, so I talked about infused beverages. That right now is really the area that's growing the most and the quickest is in these beverage spaces. And it's been a pretty hot topic that we're trying to dig more into what type of beverages they're really looking at and what types of ingredients are going into those beverages. Now, keep in mind, you got some hurdles to get over here from you can't really put CBD in food unless you're in certain states. So most of this right now should be in hemp grain, but what does that look like and what types of beverages are those going in? We've seen a pretty big drop in the general foods, but part of this is also they've been in the process of reorganizing some of the UPC codes and some of this in the descriptions on where they fall at in the grocery store. So we're trying to sort through some of those issues as well. And we're starting to see a big uptick on the liquor side as well. So it's been interesting to look at this data. As I mentioned, we're getting deeper and deeper into this research. We'll have something out later this summer that really digs more into this and provides a more national market scope for what all's going on in this market. We're also doing some surveys on the backside too, trying to look at who all's seeking information on hemp products. So the nice part is that, 39% of our survey have at least have heard or seen information on hemp products, but they really don't pay much attention. So we've got it, they've heard of it. Now we got to move them from this point over to this point where they pay attention, it catches their eye, and then hopefully into this seek more information on it so they have a deeper understanding of what these products are, what they bring to the table. Got more information on on attitudes towards hemp production, and Acidosis mentioned that this is a study out of University of Vermont. One of our grad students at the University of Vermont has been working on this for part of her dissertation. And we've been looking at pet foods. So they're neutral on pet attitudes towards hemp and pet foods. A portion of them are also positive to highly positive on that. We've started to see some states institute policies that allow these types of products into those market channels, which is interesting, given that it's still illegal at the federal level. But we are starting to see states move that direction, and that you're starting to see some of that show up in this data as well. Construction materials is another one that people are really positive on for this industry. Plastics, and I think these are kind of two low-hanging fruits, probably the construction industry first, especially from the fiber side, which also can get into some of the carbon side of the coin as well. So it's got some interesting components there that feed back into the production space, but we could delve deeper into those if somebody wanted to. We do see quite a bit of people out there thinking about the clothing and textiles, but their attitudes aren't quite as positive on it as they are some of the other products that are out there. So, just something to keep in mind as you go forward and as this industry moves forward. So kind of looking forward, from the policy standpoint, I'm really looking forward to the 2023 Farm Bill and what changes we're going to make in that and how we're going to move this industry forward. The types of regulations, there's a plan out there for an exemption for grain and fiber production. That's an interesting piece that's been put out there. Even if those crops go hot, given that they're growing it for grain or fiber, they would be exempt from having to do those testing components. Trade is another interesting piece, especially if we move to the 1%. If you move to 1%, I would say that on the downside, you've restricted market access for a lot of producers, because if you go from 0.3% to 1%, you don't need nearly as many producers, especially on the floral side of the coin, as you do at the 0.3%. So something to think about from that space. The trade side of the coin, if we go to a 1%, there may be some countries that now won't trade with us as they have a 0% THC rule. So how do we get around that? Can we actually play in that space? And will countries actually talk to us with a 1% rule? I think some will, I think some won't. So that's been a big issue. Investment, public and private. So we've seen a lot of private investment, especially in the fiber side of the coin and in the grain side of the coin going in, but it's got, this crop was out of production for 80 years and really hasn't had any, very little research done on it. So it's taking a lot of effort on the private side to get that done. But as many of you probably saw within the last week, NIFA put out its piece on the public funding that it's been providing for the hemp industry. And I was proud to say that several of our projects that I'm on were in that publication. And I think there's more public funding to come on that front. From a production standpoint, I think I will see an uptick in grain and fiber acres. Commodity prices are going to continue to be a problem to compete with those other commodities. Biomass supply has dropped from those oversupply days, but there's still quite a bit left out there on the market that we still haven't completely worked through. So I think we'll see floral production acres flat to down a little bit again for this year, but this will also be very location dependent, as there are some locations around the country, specifically maybe up in the Northeast, that I'm starting to hear grumblings or rumblings of those prices being fairly strong for the 2020 or 2022 production period. On the consumer side, I think we have a lot of market confusion that we've really got to work through if we're going to educate these consumers and bring them on board as hemp producers. labeling regulations such as grass are also going to be important. And can we get those done? Because we know consumers care about what they put in their body. So are we going to have the right labeling, and what type of regulations are we going to have in place for that? Need to understand non-consumers. So why are these people non-consumers, and what would switch them to the other side of the coin? From the processing side and manufacturer side, consumers are paying a lot of attention, but you're going to have to catch their attention. So what was really nice early on in this industry is we got a lot of free advertising. So as this industry was really growing into 2019, they were talking about this being a golden ticket and being the crop that's going to solve everything. Well, that's no longer the case today. And now the media will talk about this crop as, it's bubbles burst and it's done, but it's not done. So we're going to have to figure out how to advertise and communicate the benefits of this crop going forward. So this is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me about any of these topics or any other hemp topics you would like to talk about. I did stick over here on the right-hand side because all this work that you're seeing and even more behind the scenes would not be possible without the funding agencies that are funding a lot of this research to move this, to help move this industry forward. So I'm going to stop there and let's answer some questions if there are any.
Awesome talk, Tyler. Yeah, so we have a bunch of questions in the chat. One person asks, why did the price in Oregon fall to 0 in September 2020?
Yeah, so for that, the price in Oregon, I think, fell to 0 in that year because of the wildfires that they had out there that year. So there was almost no crop, if I remember correctly, from that. So they didn't report out a price that year.
Great. Another question asks, what percentage of states have formed commodity commissions for hemp? Do most have checkoffs?
So there have been a lot of states that have formed all these little commissions and groups. I think that's one thing that we're seeing with a very young infant industry is a lot of those commodity groups have not congealed and kind of come together and had one voice yet. So I think as this industry continues to develop, we'll start to see that piece come together and help strengthen this industry to that point. Now, in terms of you asked about checkoff programs. Right now, to my knowledge, there is no checkoff program. They've been trying to pursue a checkoff program, but to my knowledge, it hasn't been completely set up yet.
This question asks, is there enough demand for seed and fiber to grow this industry?
Well, that's a great question. And I think there is enough demand. I think it's just taking a whole lot of infrastructure to get that demand up and running. So, I mean, I think there is, there are a lot of people who want to consume this grain, but they really haven't gotten to the point of being able to consume it because it's a fairly high cost superfood, I guess, if you wanted to call it a superfood. It's a fairly high cost piece on that side. In terms of the fiber side, it's still fairly it's still pretty costly. So we got to get production up to bring those costs of production down, but it's also a chicken and egg too, because most producers aren't going to move forward with production until they have a place to go with that. So it's been a struggle, but I think we're starting to see more and more companies and investments being made to that.
Awesome. Other question asks, do you have storage cost data for raw flowers over 12 months or extracted CBD over the same time frame?
That's data right now we don't have. It is part of our production cost survey that we have put together. However, we, as I kind of mentioned, that's still stuck in O&B and we haven't been able to send that out. So, but that's something we're really trying to get a handle on is what is that storage cost over 12 months? And in addition, beyond that, when you start to store it over 12 months, what is the degradation of those CBD and other compounds that are in that. And is there degradation, and what is the best storage method to look at that? So we've done some really brief studies at the University of Kentucky to look at different storage methods. One storage method would be just to store it in a super sack in a raw floral material at the proper moisture level. We've done some freeze drying of it. Freeze drying is really nice, but it's also really expensive. So we're kind of still looking at that.
Great. A question asks, does Canada have registered pesticides for its hemp?
Yes, they do, but they're also have been grain producers for 30 plus years. So they have a lot longer history in that space, and they do have chemicals approved up there. And within the US, I guess I should be a little more clear on that. We do have some chemicals approved, but they're all biological chemicals. So they're fit more into that organic production space, probably than many others.
Great. Another question asks, are there any market distinctions recognizing short and or long hemp fiber?
So I think depending upon the industry you're trying to go into, I think that's one of the things that we really need to take into consideration. So for example, if you were going into a process of flooring, hemp flooring, that's going to use the whole plant, well, they don't really care about if it's long or short strand fibers, because it's all going into one piece. Now you get into the textile space, you get into some of the other end products. Yes, they care about that length. And I think that's been one of the things that the fiber industry has really struggled with, is when we originally rolled a lot of this out, we just, we put fiber seed out in the field and said, we'll produce it. And it was kind of this field of dreams, and the industry will come. Well, we can't really think about it in that way. We have to start with the end product. Where's it going? Is it going into bioplastics? Is it going into the automobile manufacturing industry? Is it going into fiber? And start to think and work back down the supply chain or up the supply chain to the producer to get the right genetics and stuff in place to produce that type of fiber. So we're starting to see more along that lines moving forward, but it's been a struggle to get there.
Great. Another question from Ernie Sieber at Alabama A&M asks, what's the projected economics of the growing medical cannabis industry as more states are legalizing the process?
Well, I can't say I've done a whole lot of work in the medical cannabis side of things, but what I can say is that we had a medical cannabis bill introduced in the state of Kentucky. And from the rough estimates that, we were doing on that, I mean, from a production standpoint, I think it was going to take like 14, 15 acres to produce enough cannabis for the medical side, depending upon what the assumptions were on the number of consumers to satisfy the state of Kentucky's need. So from that standpoint, it's not a whole lot of acres. Now, you can juxtapose that to the tax side of the coin. And yes, there would be a lot of taxes on that side. Now, we did not get into estimating what those taxes are and how much that would benefit the state. But, as we can see from states like Colorado, California, those tax benefits can be significant.
Great. Interesting question. Do you see hemp fiber processing as being a high value to various industries due to its ability to produce commodities across the board? And what percentage of fiber processors do we have across the US to handle this volume?
Well, a lot of the fiber processors across the country are very small at this point in time. So that is one of the issues. Now, the question becomes is what type of fiber processing do we want to do? I mean, there are processes out there that we can chemically red it. There are processes out there that don't require necessarily decortication to happen, or decortication can be done in a different method. So, but keep in mind the decortication process is really there to break it into the hurd, the bast, primarily hurd and the bast side of things. So, if you really want to think about it from a textile standpoint, you're really in the bast game. But unfortunately, as a decorticator, and in terms of volume for that decorticator, you're really in the hurd side of things. So you got to find markets for both hurd and bast, specifically hurd, to think about how you become profitable in that space. So, but most of those fiber processors right now are on a fairly small scale. I mean, I've heard of some processors. There are some processors starting this year in 2022 that are larger, and I think will grow in scale. But commercial scale, they'll be commercial scale, but on the small side of commercial scale. So we're still several years out there.
Couple questions regarding the 2023 Farm Bill. I guess this makes farmers become licensed with their individual states if they're already sending data to FSA. Do you think that this is good for the hemp industry? Do you think it needs to be lobbied to be removed? Like, what are your thoughts on
that? That's not really something that I get into analyzing the policies that are made, not really setting the policy. So that's been one of those really interesting pieces. Now, to go along with that, though, it depends upon how the regulatory framework is set up. I mean, there's a couple of other questions in here about legalization of the medical of marijuana and how it affects the industry. If marijuana is legalized across the country, it probably changes the whole paradigm of how this crop is managed from a regulatory standpoint. So that is one of those pieces to think about and watch. Now, I will say that the marijuana industry and the hemp industry right now are almost in direct competition when you think about Delta 8 and some of the other specifically Delta 8. And I think that's something the industry really needs to think about is how you deal with that going forward, because if we are under the same tax regulations as the marijuana industry, I think it becomes a real struggle for this industry to be profitable. So, but at the same time, I understand why processors have done it, because that's how they survived the downturn in the pricing since 2019. But I guess to try and get that back, do I think you should have to be licensed with both? It's a bit of a burden right now, and I would agree that it is a burden. But I think the other piece of that too is just because the only data that's going to FSA is planted and harvested acres. So they're not doing anything with the regulatory component of is it hemp or is it marijuana? So they're not doing anything on the testing side. Until that testing requirement we get rid of that, then I think you're either going to have to report to the state or you're going to have to report to the federal government through the USDA hemp program, one of the two on that, and until they change that.
Awesome, thank you. Another question asks, the major variation on planted versus harvested acres in Colorado in one of your slides, is there an explanation, or is that an indication of an alternate underground market?
So no, it's not necessarily an underground market. If you were to look at Kentucky, it's the same issue there too. So take, for example, in the state of Kentucky, you have to have a license to hold the raw material. So if you've been holding that material since 2019, you still have a license and you still have a planted, a number that's planted or licensed, but you may not have harvested it. So, and you're also seeing a lot of failures that take place in these. So one, it never, you planted it, but it failed to come out of the ground, or it failed, you had lots of weed pressure, so you bush hogged it down. So you start to see a lot of discrepancies in there as well. And if you were to look at Kentucky numbers, you see a lot of discrepancies between planted and harvested in general. So I think that's a common trend you see across the country. But that is something to think about. Is there's a licensed acres, there's a planted acres, and there are harvested acres, and those vary quite differently from one state to the next.
Great. Another question asks, where are you seeing private and public cooperation or collaboration in developing supply chains specific to various market channels?
Ask that question one more time.
Where, I guess, like what states are you seeing, or where are you seeing in the country private and public cooperation or collaboration in developing supply chains that are specific to specific markets?
So I will tell you one of the really cool, Colorado is probably out in front of a lot of states. They have what they call the CHAMP report, which was a very large effort on the part of Colorado State University and the Colorado Department of Ag to bring all the constituents and stakeholders from across the state on all levels of the supply chain together and try and put together a comprehensive plan for the development of hemp in that state. And you can go out and find the CHAMP report online for that state. That's probably a state that is moving forward on that side of things. New York is another example with their food science lab there at in Geneva and some of the things that they have going on that side of the coin. So, I mean, there's lots of examples out there, you know, especially in some of those early states.
This question asks, any forward-thinking uses being utilized for alternative products for fiber on the West Coast, such as trash bags and paper that can be utilized in the Southeast region to create a need for hemp acreage?
So, yeah, there are a lot of things. So we were just out at NOCO, and there was a lot of hemp being put into plastic bags, into those, not necessarily pencils, but they're trying to get into some of those consumables that I think could generate some additional acres in the Southeast. I think in the Southeast, though, we're still struggling with the right genetics to get at those lower latitudes, or to get at the latitudes in the Southeast part of the U.S. to really grow high quality fiber that's going to go into some of those. So, yeah, I mean, it's coming along, but it's kind of slow.
I wanted to jump in with a question that I addressed in the chat, but I thought this would be something our lab could speak to a little bit, and I'd love to hear Mark's opinion of as well. So Dave asks, are you aware of any efforts to establish fiber standards, grading, testing protocols, either in regional markets, private standards, or amongst state or federal entities? I'm thinking along the lines of USDA cotton and wool programs. So I love that question, and that's very near and dear to our heart at our laboratory. So we are developing a set of phenotypic standards for hemp fiber quality right now in conjunction with Chris Delhomme at the Southern Regional Research Center in New Orleans. We've developed a USDA hemp phenotyping handbook where we measure everything from fiber, oil, plant morphology, secondary metabolites, including cannabinoids, and develop rigorous ways of measuring those. So developing standards for hemp is interesting. And you mentioned cotton and wool programs. One similar analog that could be leveraged to help address this question is looking at a lot of the work done with flax. Flax is also a bast fiber. There's machinery that can evaluate flax fiber quality. Can that be applied to hemp? Well, that's an ongoing project that we've got going on with Chris Delhomme in New Orleans. Interestingly, there are hemp fiber phenotyping machinery. Those were made in the USSR pre-fall of the Soviet Union. So that machinery is not really available nowadays, to the best of my knowledge. But Tyler is probably going to have a lot of thoughts on the economics of fiber standards.
So, Zach, I'm glad to hear that you all are working on that, because I think that's one of the big issues that we're really facing within the industry, because I think we're missing the boat on how we're pricing this stuff. So if you want to talk about the biomass segment, we're pricing it on a percent CBD. Well, CBD is not the only valuable component in that. Another industry that you might think about that has something kind of similar to that, that might be able to be used would be the sugar industry. You basically, when they bring it in, they base it on the theoretical sugar extract of that. So that would be another industry to think about that kind of does some of that and I think we're missing the boat on the grain and fiber side as well. So on the fiber side, the quality component. And I think that really is going to be driven by what those end uses for that are. And we really need to rethink that pricing model that sits there on the grain side. You know, unfortunately in the US, or fortunately in the US, however you want to put it, soybeans are sold on a per bushel basis, not on the oil content. If you go to South America, oil content matters. And for this product, oil content should matter because it's pretty high in omega-6 and 3. So it's got some other health implications that could also be in there that are something to consider as well. So I would be really interested, Zach, to talk with you some more about how that's working, because this is also some of this pricing stuff is also part of an ARS project.
Awesome. And with that, I believe we've hit the 3 o'clock mark. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Dr. Mark, for giving that talk. Yeah, thank you for all your support throughout this webinar series. We're extremely grateful for it. And it's nice to see people from all different walks of life coming together to learn about hemp.
Hey, and not to take the last word, but I just want to echo that. This has been so much fun. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate all of the time y'all have spent here with us. So go grow some hemp, make some money, do some awesome research. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.